Welcome to the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network, the podcast 10 for 10, which brings you the week's top 10 compliance stories curated together in one podcast each week. Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, brings you the compliance professional stories you need to be aware of at the end of your busy week. Sit back and in 10 minutes, hear about the stories every compliance professional should be aware of. Every Saturday, 10 for 10 highlights the most important news, insights, and analysis for the compliance professional, all curated by the voice of compliance, Tom Fox. Get your weekly filling of compliance stories with 10 for 10. Hosted by Tom Fox. 10 for 10 is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. First, a word from the sponsor of the Compliance Podcast Network for this month, Ethico.
In the intricate world of ethics and compliance, each second is precious, and slow case closures are more than just delays, they're missed opportunities. Enter Ethico. Our solution revolutionizes case management, cutting closure times in half and turning every challenge into a chance for improvement. Imagine a workspace where efficiency and compliance coexist harmoniously. Don't just dream of faster resolutions, make it your reality. Visit ethico.com/CPN today to book a demo and dive into our exclusive white paper by Tom Fox, the ROI of Compliance, and to try our free ROI calculator. Empower your team with the tools they deserve.
10 for 10 for the week ending May 25, 2024. Our first story is from the Wall Street Journal, Risk and Compliance Journal. Richard Vandeford reporting that while the Securities and Exchange Commission has tried to make it easier for investors to drag corporations into political and cultural battles, corporations are fighting this tooth and nail, and indeed are now suing shareholders who bring shareholder resolutions on hot-button issues. The lawsuit was upheld, at least to move forward, by Exxon, who has sued a shareholder for bringing forward such a resolution, even though the shareholder withdrew the resolution after the lawsuit was filed. Next up from the Financial Times, a very troubling article from from Brazil, as the Brazilian Supreme Court has overturned the final car wash corruption convictions, eviscerating completely Brazil's attempt to bring corruption to bear in that country, once known as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. It was cleaned up a little bit by Lava Jato, but now the Supreme Court, under the sway of the current administration, has instructed done what the administration wants and overturned the convictions. This comes after, of course, Marcelo Odebrecht also had his criminal conviction nullified. Next up, from the Washington Post, the Fat Leonard convictions have been overturned, or not overturned. I guess overturned's the right word, but because of pattern of prosecutorial misconduct in the investigation. Several cases have unraveled, and the U.S. District Court has dismissed several cases based upon the conduct of the naval prosecutors in this case. Obviously, a huge red eye to the Judge Advocacy Generals and any of those involved in the Fat Leonard case. Our next story is another story, our second story from the Wall Street Journal, also from the Risk and Compliance Journal. Dylan Tokar reporting this time that the German company Merck KGaA, their North American unit, received a declination after it proactively disclosed information about a scheme by Company Insider and others to export sensitive biochemicals to China. The two men involved in the case have pled guilty to wire fraud conspiracy charges, but it's the first export controls case that a declination was issued. And this is obviously significant as the export control arena is ramping up considerably as well. Next up, from Bloomberg, an anti-graft buster has been nominated as the next president of Vietnam and the proposed head of the new parliament. The party Central Committee proposed Minister of Public Security To Lam to the presidential position. The party nominations come among a year-long anti-graft campaign pushed by the Communist Party that ensnared 2 presidents, 2 deputy prime ministers, a parliamentary chairman, scores of other government officials, and business executives. Indeed, one was sentenced to death for her part in a $12 billion fraud case that went to trial back in April. So Vietnam is finally taking corruption seriously. Our next story comes to us from the New York Times that reports that FIFA is not only trying to put a corruption scandal behind it, but it is trying to withdraw the rules, policies, and procedures it put in place and claiming it has the endorsement of the U.S. Justice Department in doing so. Of course, the DOJ has said hogwash to all of that, but FIFA is attempting to eviscerate its own rules around anti-bribery and anti-corruption. Obviously, a huge step back for world sporting events, and FIFA, as one of the most corrupt, if not the most corrupt, really needs to reconsider its position, and certainly the DOJ has not blessed their actions. And next up, another story from the Wall Street Journal, this time technology, as Meta faces EU probe over Facebook and Instagram child protection policies. The EU Commission said that it is opening a formal probe into Facebook and Instagram, including their use of algorithms that officials say may stimulate addictive behavior in children. Investigators will also look at the rabbit hole effects where a user is inundated with similar content, as well as the platform's age verification tools and privacy settings for minors. So Facebook may be called to task in the EU over this. It's too bad U.S. regulators can't seem to get either the regulatory authority to do so or even moving forward. Next up, our last story from the Wall Street Journal, also from the Risk and Compliance Journal, also from Dylan Tokar, that investment advisors face customer vetting requirements in a huge AML push. U.S. regulators took another step this week towards bolstering AML laundering or anti-money laundering safeguards with a proposal to require that certain investment advisors verify the identity of their customers. The proposal, which would extend the identification requirements that have already existed for broker-dealers and mutual funds, was issued by the SEC and FinCEN. The move is part of a broad push by the U.S. to patch up regulations designed to counter illicit finance. Among the investment advisors, FinCEN has also targeted vulnerabilities in the U.S. real estate market and corporate entities that could be used to hide the source of dirty money. And our next story, indeed our final story, comes to us from the Financial Times. Although not exactly or precisely a compliance story, I thought it was certainly interesting. And it's entitled, Fewer Meetings, More Memos, The Future of Asynchronous Work. This could have been an email as a common workplace complaint. For some companies is now a guiding principle. Since the pandemic, to cut ties to the office with more people working remotely when and where it suits them best, an asynchronous approach means colleagues overlap less and have to communicate in different ways. This means fewer meetings, whether personal, hybrid, or virtual, and more detailed memos, instructional videos, and collaborative documents. So this, I thought, was very interesting because I'd like compliance professionals to think about this in terms of risk and what does it mean for your compliance program going forward. As I mentioned at the start of this podcast, this month's sponsor for the entire Compliance Podcast Network is Ethico. Have you ever wondered how to show the ROI of your compliance program? Have you struggled with the budgeting process, getting the funds you want for your compliance program? Well, I've partnered with Ethico to put together a white paper on the ROI of compliance, which shows you not only how to demonstrate ROI, but also how to speak finance when you're sitting across from the CFO with your budget proposals. Check out the website, and get the white paper. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. I hope you'll check out the newest podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network, the Compliance Tip of the Day. In Compliance Tip of the Day, I give a 5 to 8 minute summary of one tip that you can integrate into your compliance program or put together for greater compliance program efficiency.